evening and welcome to Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. I'm Star Smart. Let's begin. Today's news from Ambazonia reflects a nation still caught between repression and resistance, memory and momentum, loss and resolve. Across towns, campuses, and communities, the reality of occupation, arbitrary power, and unbroken political aspiration continue to define daily life. From the persistence of mass arrest and the criminalization of youth and education to the enduring imprisonment of Ambazonia's political leadership 8 years on. The story of today is not one of isolated incidents, but of a long-running struggle that refuses to fade into silence. At the same time, developments on the ground underscore a hard truth. Despite years of crackdowns, intimidation, and military force, the demand for dignity, justice, and self-determination remains alive. Ambazonia today stands at a crossroad where law, force, and identity collide, where the consequences of unresolved political grievances ripple through generations, shaping both the pain of the present and the direction of the future. These are not just headlines, but they are signals of a people still asking fundamental questions about freedom, accountability, and what it truly takes to secure lasting peace. Stay with us as we get the prime headlines. On Undaunted tonight, we'll take a look at the confession that rekindles allegations of state-backed violence against Ambazonians. The colonial forces escalating arbitrary arrest by targeting university community in Bambili. We also see Ambazonian State Army Boyo Python's targeted operation yesterday. And 8 years after the NERA-10 incident, armed resistance signals an unbroken struggle. On the African scene, we'll take a look at Touadera securing third term as Central African Republic faces questions of power, peace, and trust. And on the global scene, Maduro denying drug charges after dramatic United States raid sparks global outcry. Let's get into the full briefings of Undaunted tonight. Do stay tuned. Well, a newly surfaced confession by an Umbororo man alleging collaboration between armed Umbororo elements, a notorious land actor identified as Ndawara, and the Colonial Cameroon military has sent shockwaves across Ambazonia, reopening deep wounds linked to years of civilian killings, land dispossession, and forced displacement. In the confession on the video, you can see the individual claims that some Umbororo fighters were armed and mobilized with the support of Ndawara and operated alongside French Cameroon's military to attack and kill Ambazonian civilians in their ancestral communities. Now, while the full circumstances and verification of the confession remains subject to further investigation, its content resonates powerfully with long-standing accusations by local populations and human rights groups who have for years reported coordinated violence targeting indigenous communities. For many Ambazonians, this confession is not perceived as isolated or a revelation that is alone, but as a confirmation of a pattern. Since the escalation of the conflict in 2016, multiple reports have documented attacks on villages, the burning of homes, killings of farmers, and the systematic seizure of ancestral land, often attributed to a nexus of armed actors operating with impunity. The alleged role of Ndawara as a land grabber and enabler of violence has been cited repeatedly in community testimonies, though accountability has remained elusive. The impact of this confession is therefore profound. It reinforces the belief among affected communities that the violence they endured was not random or merely communal, but part of a broader, organized strategy involving state forces and non-state proxies. This perception deepens mistrust towards the French Cameroon and further erodes confidence in domestic mechanisms of justice for survivors and families of victims. The confession revives trauma, but also strengthens calls for international recognition of what they describe as crimes against humanity and, in some cases, genocidal intent. Politically and legally, the development adds weight to arguments that Ambazonians have been making before international forums that the conflict is not simply an internal security matter, but one involving systematic targeting of a people in their homeland. It may also influence future documentation efforts, as confessions, if independently corroborated, can become critical evidence in international legal proceedings, truth commissions, or universal jurisdiction cases. Well, looking ahead, Ambazonians face a complex but necessary path forward. First, there is an urgent need for independent verification of the confession by credible international investigators to establish facts beyond doubt. Second, there must be intensified documentation of past attacks, land seizures, and chains of command linking armed actors to state structures. Third, community leaders and civil society groups may increasingly push for international legal avenues such as submission to the International Criminal Court, the ICC African Human Rights Mechanisms, or national courts exercising universal jurisdiction, given the absence of justice at home. Now, at the same time, there is a growing call for protective mechanisms for vulnerable communities still living in contested areas, as well as restitution and land rights guarantees for displaced families. Without accountability, many fear that violence will continue under different pretexts, leaving future generations trapped in cycles of dispossession and bloodshed. Well, as this the confession reverberates across Ambazonia and beyond, it raises a critical issue that goes to the heart of international law and justice. Once again, we have with us in the studio our revered barrister, Team Mbeseha. And of course, we cannot continue the news without getting his thoughts. Welcome, Barrister Mbeseha. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. Now, looking at this particular report, we're starting off with, if a confession alleges collaboration between state military forces and armed civilian groups in the killing of indigenous Ambazonian population in this case, what legal thresholds must be met for this to constitute not just crimes against humanity, but then genocide under international law? And how can such evidence, importantly, how can such evidence be effectively pursued when the accused state retains full control over domestic institution?
Well, if you are talking about confessions and what they mean in international law and local law, it's as simple as good morning. A confession is an admission of wrongdoing. You admit voluntarily that you did something wrong. Voluntary means nobody is putting pressure on you. You're not being beaten up to confess. And so, as far as this case is concerned, we see a human being sitting there. There's no pressure on him. He's a normal human being. There's nobody beating him. There's no armed guy holding a gun on his head. And he tells a story of what he did. And he names the people who helped him to do it. Is that confession? Of course it is. Is that enough? No, it is not enough. You have to verify whether what the guy is saying can be corroborated. Because you can confess to something willfully, but deliberately trying to hurt somebody else. And so if the guy says that he was given arms by A or B or C, those A, B, or C who are supposed to have given him the arms are living human beings. And so you have to talk to them because he's accusing them. Sure, they want to deny the fact that they did it because when he's trying to implicate them, they will deny it. But you have to look for other corroborative means. What arms did he give? Was he alleged to have given to this guy and others? You must remember at the background, the position of arms in Cameroon is very, very restricted. Not everybody can buy arms, even hunting rifles. And so to get a hunting rifle, the least is that you have to go and get authorization from the prefect. And so when they become available everywhere, they have numbers on them. How do you get that weapon? If it was given to you by the prefect, for example, who is supposed to sign for you to buy, did you buy one? Because when you go to buy one from the armory, you pay a price, you pay a receipt. That's when it is registered. And so there's so much that is known that is verifiable. But who doubt this? People might doubt it. But can this idea, this strategy be corroborated? Of course. It is corroborated because the giving of arms to Bororo people and any other person or group of people is a well-known strategy used by Yaoundé. Not just an accusation, they themselves admit doing those things. For example, in the Garabou case, for example, the government official report of what happened in Garabou says that they gave arms to unknown people, which arms they used to go and kill people. I won't ask where are these arms. They said the arms have disappeared. This is in Bororo, this is in Garabou. Can this have any meaning here? Of course it does. Because this is a repetition of a pattern. This is what government has been doing all the time to weaken the struggle. That's a strategy they have used all the time. They exploited our disagreements. We have talked about Bororo killing people. They will not start to live with their neighbors today. They have been living with them forever and ever. So why did this disagreement suddenly surface to the extent of people being killed? The Boros being accused of killing people. Government is exploiting the local disagreements. Government is the only one who has arms. Government is the only person who is supposed to solve the problem. They are not solving it. They are using different methods to try to cow the people of Ambazonia. They don't attack every single community. They attack a community where they believe there are people who are sympathetic to the Ambazonian cause. Not only there, they exploit local disagreement like chieftaincy, and they will arm one group with the other. So these are events, these are occasions that you can use to corroborate whether this guy's story is true. But above all I've said, he's a living human being. If there's any doubt, it can be questioned. He has named the people. He didn't just say I was going, he has named the guy who gave him the arms. Was he alone? Of course not. And so you just need to be free, in a free environment where nobody is threatening him, and then he will tell the bare truth. That truth will be corroborated with other things. Talking to these people and the type of arms that they carry. This guy sitting right there, if he has arms, he's not in a position to be able to buy good arms. He doesn't even have the skills. He's not a hunting rifle. So he asked, how did these arms get to this man's hands? If they didn't have the corroboration of somebody higher in the rank, they will get them out. And if it is prosecution, this man will serve as a witness and accused at the same time. And as a witness, he was used to harm other people. He's an accused. As a witness, to show that he didn't do it alone, he brings in other collaborators. And so that is how far it goes. A confession is not conclusive, but it becomes conclusive when you seek other corroborative elements of a confession. Above all, I've insisted that it was freely given. Nobody compared him. There was nobody holding a gun over his head. He didn't see anybody beating him for anything sake. And so that is important. It can be used in any court of law, internationally, and even locally if it's a free court. But that is the beginning of the revelation. There's so much going on in this struggle for the past 10 years, 9 years it is, which leaves a lot to be desired. The administration hands are so tight, the hands are so dirty that either it is in Bororo or local groups funded by them, call them the ADF. Not me saying it. Madam Mundi, who was adopted by the ADF, told the same story. She saw arms there given to the ADF by the government. This was a confession from the ADF agents in the camp. And so there's so much to be desired. There's so much left out there. We can only wish and pray that this thing finds itself to the court. Because when it goes into the court, it will no longer be the issue of just that guy. Victims will have a say. And those victims will have lawyers. They will be able to defend the interests of their victims. By questioning this very guy, if somebody seeks to discredit him. Over to you.
Very well said, Barrister Mbeseha, and very crystal clear on that. While we see that there are those who sponsor these Mbororo's according to this confession that we heard, that we got from that video, we also see that the biggest sponsors are doing more than just sponsoring Mbororos. The act of Kali arbitrary arrest continues in Ambazonia, and it's a sad one because even on the morning of 5th January, just yesterday, 2026, French Cameroon's military carried out another wave of mass arbitrary arrest, locally known as Kali, this time in Bambili, a university town and one of Ambazonia's most important academic hubs. Multiple eyewitnesses report that several youths were rounded up and forced into military trucks in broad daylight without warrants, explanations, or evidence of wrongdoing. Unlike previous arrests, sweeps in residential or rural areas, this operation carries particular grave implications because it unfolded within a school environment where many of those targeted are believed to be students. Since it was around the school vicinity, the arrests were not linked to any active hostilities or security threats at the time, reinforcing concerns that the operation was not about law enforcement, but intimidation and collective punishment. Now, this development marks a dangerous escalation. By extending arbitrary arrests into university communities, the colonial military is no longer merely terrorizing villages. It is undermining the intellectual and generational future of Ambazonia. Universities are meant to be protected civilian spaces under international humanitarian law, especially in non-international armed conflict. Students are civilians, yet in Bambili, armed troops treated young people pursuing education as enemies of the state. For many families, the fear is not only for the physical safety of those arrested, but for the permanent disruption of their education, mental health, and life trajectory. The consequences extend far beyond the individuals taken. When students are abducted into military detention, classrooms empty, academic calendars collapse, and fear replaces learning. Young people begin to associate education with danger, not opportunity. Many withdraw from schools altogether, going into hiding or fleeing their communities. Others are traumatized by repeated raids and harassment, struggle to concentrate, perform academically, or envision a future beyond survival. Now, this pattern risks producing a lost generation, bright minds forced off campuses and into uncertainty, unemployment, displacement, or chronic fear. The long-term destabilization is profound. A society stripped of its students today is deprived of its teachers, doctors, engineers, journalists, and leaders tomorrow. Legally, the arrest mirrors the same violations documented in Queen months back and elsewhere. Arbitrary detentions violate Article 9 of the ICCPR and Article 6 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. When conducted as mass sweeps following no specific criminal act, they amount to collective punishment prohibited under the Geneva Conventions. When such actions systematically target youths and students, they also raise concerns about persecution of a civilian population, a prosecutable crime under international law. Now, what makes the Bambili arrest especially chilling is the apparent intent. Targeting university communities signals a shift towards neutralizing thought, dissent, and future leadership. It suggests that the regime now views educated Ambazonians not merely as civilians, but as a threat, ideas to be suppressed before they mature into voices, movements, or governance alternatives. Now, as the war enters its ninth year, the pattern is unmistakable when the colonial state fails to win legitimacy of peace. It responds by criminalizing existence itself. First villages, then towns, and now campuses. A society cannot heal while its youths are hunted. It cannot rebuild while its students are dragged from lecture halls into military trucks, and it cannot claim peace while education is treated as a punishable act. The arrests in Bambili are not just another security operations, they are an assault on Ambazonia's future. And it is at this juncture we'll get over to our news panelists for today, Barrister Mbeseha. You've heard the news one too many times. We've seen reports of arbitrary arrests just even weeks ago rather. We saw another arbitrary arrest in Queen, and the video was chilly. And yet again, now in a university environment, there's a difference to this one. Would like to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this? Is it really like targeted at education, or is there something else about this particular arbitrary arrest? Barrister Mbeseha.
No, there's nothing else there. You see, for you to understand what is going on in Bambili or that environment, you must do history. You see, the struggle for Ambazonia that dates back decades has always been targeting the youth. It's a pattern. Those of you who are still young and might not know. How was the University of Boyo created? It was created out of the petition of the youth, who say Yaoundé was too much for them. They could not go to university where they would only be forced to learn in French. They were the youth, not your father and mine. And then they won the battle. And the government bowed down to create what they call an Anglo-Saxon university. The university issue is for youth, it's not for old people. They pretended to create a university called the Anglo-Saxon University of Boyo, where the children were supposed to speak English, do their lessons in English. When they got there, that text of that creation of that university provided for this office of the student union. There was a student union out there. That student union was going to be run by the youths, the students themselves, who are all youths. It was created in 1993. Came 1994, 1995. What happened? The very youths who were running that student union office were arrested. They were banned. The union was banned. Go ask Akwanga, Acho Ayaba, they were all part of that group. They left the country. They banned them as youths from continuing to be in Boyo. And there was even an official text. There's no Akwanga, Ayaba would ever be admitted in any state university in Cameroon. And they even went further to jail people like Akwanga. Akwanga was jailed. These were all youths. So they see in the youth something very, very dangerous. Fast forward, this was 1995. When Akwanga and Ayaba successfully left the country, Akwanga escaped from prison anyway. When they left the country and found themselves abroad, the youth did not give up. The youths continued to be what they are. And then came 2016. That's 10 years after that. What happened in Boyo? The crisis that was turned into war today was the beginning of the crisis in the University of Boyo. What did they do? They targeted the university. They came there and took those guys, those young children, tortured them, rubbed them in mud. What was the idea? To dissuade them from ever protesting, from ever raising any finger of protest against whatever was going on there. Those children, the trauma they went through, I don't know where they are all still alive, but no girl, they are today women, 10 years ago. The trauma will not leave them. But that was not even enough. That was not even enough. When it matured into something bigger, The government thought that the best thing to do when it became the consortium, in addition to the SCNC. 2016, they banned the whole nonsense. We don't want to hear about this thing anymore. These were the youths involved. The thing matured now into a war. I see what has happened to the youths. So it's a pattern. We have complained that they burn down villages, they burn down schools. Schools are meant for the youth. So if the government is setting fire on schools, where is the vision for the youth? No vision. And they can go back to Bamenda right now, what you're talking about. They realize, they have understood that. The youths are vibrant, as I said yesterday. They read, they use social media. Yaoundé knows that. They became adults. They become adults in the long run, but they start building their resistance as youths. And so Bambili in particular is host to the university. A university I will call a random university. They don't even know where the university is. There are no hostels for the places for the students to live in. So they all converge in those villages or wherever they find themselves. They're all there. So coming to arrest, swap, conduct Kale there once every 6 months, once every 2 weeks to catch them, it's not new. They are a targeted group of people, the youths. And they will say they are doing in Bambili. They will say we're not targeting the students. But 90% of the inhabitants of that place are essentially students. When they learn their lesson in Boyo, that they will go and catch the students in the student dormitories, it was going to be taken notice of. They have abandoned that idea of going to the campus or Boyo and doing the same thing. Because for them to get into the campus, they will require the permission of the rector. Now they can't abandon. Now this is a fatal ground. They create a university, people find living space anywhere, but everybody knows, everybody agrees, the bulk of the population there are students. So you come and catch them, pretend that you're making Kale, but you know that 90-80% of the people who are catching their Kale are all going to be students. 90-80% of the people they are going to extort money from them are all going to be students. And so the students are a targeted group, which Yaoundé fears a lot. Maybe you don't know. Until 1993, 1994, the teaching of the history of Ambazonia, called the Southern Cameroon, was banned. You see, it's done in schools. You were not allowed to teach a history of your resolution 1608, resolution whatever thing. You were not allowed to teach it because they didn't want the youth to get that information. Because they got the information, as I've said many times before, you sitting there. You were not born in 1961. When you learn the history and see what's going on now, you become more radicalized. And so the best way for them to succeed is to keep away the information. Not reaching your parents. I know you don't need to teach me, but you want my child never to know that nonsense. Because the more my child knows, or another child or an elder knows, the more they will revolt. The revolution going on today is not mounted by the elders, it's mounted by the youths. And they're handing down the baton of rebellion, the baton of resistance to the next generation of youths, not to the next generation of elders. The next generation of elders are going to die. They're on their way to the grave. And so that is what is happening. It's not a mistake. It's a targeted strategy. They have used this. And is this a crime? A big crime. Because they are doing it to them. We talk about the ICC. The ICC talks about human rights violations, human rights war crime, where you target people for who they are, not for what they have done. Kale is not because you've done anything. They didn't suspect that somebody stole a goat. They are just targeting them to look for something from them. They extort money from them to create an offense in order to arrest and keep them. And so that is a classic case of the ICC and the international jurisdiction that might be. And so again, it is not error at all. It's a strategy created many, many years ago from 1961. Remember that by 1961, people like Ben Mokong were young. They locked him up because he was a youth. In 1970, he will not come back until 1977. By the time he came back, he was older. He had lost his wife had left him. He had lost everything that he had. That was a young man at the time. And so it's a big strategy calculated not just from Yaoundé, but from France. Because they know that the youths are the people to whom we shall hand the baton of the struggle. And as long as the facts remain what they are, the youths are going to execute the plan that was worked 20 years back. The Mfongalam force, who ran the SCNC, are already old. But the youths who learn from them the history of the SCNC are not going to die. They are going to use their knowledge to fight back whatever thing they bring on them. And so we can all congratulate our youths. The more they arrest them, the more they detain them, the more they become educated. Why are we being detained? Why are we being tortured? Why is all this thing going on in Bambili? Why? Why didn't I arrest people in Bengui? Because there's nobody there for them to arrest. The youths have all escaped to find school somewhere. And they do all that. So again, it's a calculated strategy. It is well done. It is well aimed. But it's a failed strategy. Because the more they educate, the more they arrest, the more they do the kale, the more our youths get educated, the more they become radicalized to further the plan that we have as a bloc. Over to you.
Barrister Mbeseha, that is such a sad tactic to the detriment of Ambazonians in the meantime. But it is interesting that as mass arbitrary arrests continue to sweep through communities like Bambili, targeting youths and students without warrants or cause, Ambazonians are once again confronted with a painful reminder. Arbitrary arrest that has long been a central instrument used to crush the struggle for self-determination. And this reminds us of 5th January 2026, just yesterday, which marked exactly 8 years since the abduction of Ambazonia's political leadership, known as the NERA-10, from Nigeria. In January 2018, these leaders were kidnapped on foreign soil, illegally extradited to Yaoundé, and thrown in Kondegi Central Prison, where they have remained since. Their crime was not violence, insurrection, or terrorism. It was the pursuit of a legal, political, and internationally recognized right to self-determination for the people of Southern Cameroon. 8 years later, not one credible criminal act has been proven against them, yet they remain incarcerated, denied due process, and used as political hostages. The parallels between then and now are striking. What was done to the NERA-10 at the leadership level is now being replicated at the grassroots. Students, youths, and civilians swept up in mass arrests, detained without charge, extorted, or disappeared into detention facilities. The message is consistent. Dissent, thought, and identity itself are criminalized. International law is unambiguous. Arbitrary arrest violates the ICCPR and the African Charter. Kidnapping political leaders across borders and detaining them indefinitely without trial violates multiple principles of international humanitarian and human rights law. Yet, 8 years on, impunity persists. The anniversary of the NERA-10's abduction is not merely symbolic, it underscores a continuity of repression that stretches from diplomatic halls to university campuses, from leadership cells in Kondegi to military trucks in Bambili. Arbitrary arrest is not an aberration, it is policy, and still the question lingers. If 8 years of imprisonment have not silenced the call for self-determination, what does that say about the limits of repression? Barrister Mbeseha will hand this question to you. What does this say about repression? 8 years on, with the continued arbitrary arrest, the abduction of the NERA-10, the Ambazonian struggle still continues.
Well, let us get this background in the first place. Now, the people who don't understand, they caught the NERA-10 on the 5th of January 2018. In 2018, there was no armed struggle. There was no armed struggle. In 2017, when they declared the restoration of Ambazonia, there was no armed struggle. It was just an oral declaration. But the people you call the NERA-10, that they went to Nigeria to bring them back to Cameroon, officially, what was the offense? They were taken from a hotel. They just went to a hotel. They could have gone there to drink. They could have gone there to do anything to do it. They could discuss anything there. They had done nothing wrong. But remember that they included people who belong to the consortium and the SCNC. The SCNC and the consortium had been banned late in 2016 with a view to stopping anything ever made this. Because the consortium was a civil society people. They were just talking. Why was the consortium banned? Because they would not yield to pressure to accept government policy on what they were asking for. What was it? The translation of the Akada law, Ohada law, and the stopping of sending French teachers to English schools. That was just all. But because government wanted them to take their own course, they met several times and they would not yield. Remember Tassam? At the time, he was the chairman of the consortium. We told him, well, if you don't want to take this thing from us, Monday will come, and we shall see who owns Ambazonia. That was the beginning of Ghost Town. And so, yeah, they remained so frightened with this thing. These people had gone to Nigeria. You find Ayutabi was not in Cameroon when the consortium and the rest were set up. He was not even there, and a good number of them. But they went to Nigeria to arrest them, to adopt them actually, and forcefully bring them back to Cameroon. What was the goal? It was not because they committed any offense. They were just trying to hold a meeting. I don't know where they only knew the agenda of the meeting. You and me don't know. Nobody ever told us what was the objective of the meeting. But it could have been a planned thing where Yaoundé realized that when they got to Nigeria from 2017 had passed, they were not silenced. They had transformed themselves into Skakoof. They had gone to the governing council, and they were now in the stage of an interim government. So Yaoundé was following these events very, very carefully. That the attempt to decapitate the idea of Ambazonia in 2016 had rather failed woefully. Having gone to Nigeria, they had instead become stronger, and they were getting stronger and stronger. And therefore, the best thing to do was to decapitate that thing. They had crossed the line in October 2017, 30th October 2017. When they met in the fourth conclave and created something they call the interim government. The idea of a government to speak in the name of Ambazonia, or British Southern Cameroon, was where they had crossed the line. Yaoundé was not prepared, and they are still very resistant to the idea of talking to the Ambazonian government. And so for them to put an end to the government, whatever thing it was, they call it interim government, they had to take the extra steps of going to Nigeria to adopt them and bring them back and jail them. That's what they did. But did they decapitate the thing? No. It was it is still a whole failed strategy. That one belief, if the people were all brought to Koningi or kept anywhere in Cameroon in prison, they were not able to meet to decide any form of resistance. That was the idea. But that was a wrong strategy, because even after that, that was 5th of January. That is when we started thinking about the armed resistance, armed defense. They were destroying our houses in 2016, 2017. But the idea of a government was not there. The idea of raising a defense force was not even there. And so when they took this people, they thought that they had decapitated the idea of government. But they failed woefully, because what they call interim government has, instead of being decapitated, has progressed, has moved on from interim government to the full government of Ambazonia in exile. And so they have done all these things which Yaoundé never expected that we would get there. But we are there. This was a very, very wrong strategy. It is still a wrong strategy, because they did not know that the struggle, the whole Ambazonian cause, is bigger than the 10 guys they got from NERA Hotel. They are all gone, they are all in jail, but the struggle has continued 10 times better than it was before them. And so they were trying to kill a tree by cutting off the branches. They forgot that the roots and the tap roots in the ground, see deep in. they done today. They thought they could negotiate their way out, even if they brought these people under their control. They could impose some type of peace with them. That's why you find all these efforts in Bayamande, starting from Kondenge, trying to talk to Ayok Tabe, going to Canada 1, 2, 3, trying to talk to people they choose, to change the narrative. But all those things have failed. Ambazonian cause, I say Ambazonian cause, is bigger than any single individual. It's bigger than a few educated people. It's bigger than a few billionaires. And so that strategy has failed. What are they left with? They have now, we're talking about the kidnappings. We have talked about insecurity. In 2016, there was no insecurity anywhere. In 2017, there was no insecurity anywhere. The insecurity took the peak in 2019 after they abducted Sisiko and his friends and his cabinet from NERA-10. The peak of the struggle was in 2019. And they are now realized by their own count, they've lost close to 2,000 soldiers, which is a lie anyway. They've lost 10 times more than that. And so that's the practical reality. Ambazonia is bigger than any single person. Ambazonian is not out for sale. It's not for you to choose to want to deal with. They tried to decapitate the interim government, they failed. The government is now today waiting for them. Anytime they want, and we're ready for them anytime, they must come to the negotiation table and address the root causes without any prior conditions. That's the bottom line. That is the simplest thing even the dullest man in the world can understand. Can somebody assume that Paul Biya doesn't know these things? That he doesn't understand what it is meant by going to a negotiation table without preconditions and negotiating an end to the struggle? Who doesn't know that? Even a primary school child knows that. Even Mr. Samofo, who was a parliamentarian from Santa in 1959, 1960, he was barely, I don't think he passed number 6. He can understand that language. So what does it take? They have used a wrong strategy, adopting people who are, as they do now today in Bambili, catching our students and locking them in Bamenda, getting Moja to torment women in Boyo. It's just the wrong strategy. They must, if they want to end this thing. If they want to end their own bleeding, because they are bleeding. They are bleeding economically, they are bleeding physically. If they want to end those wounds and begin to look at the skies, they must come to the conference table without precondition and negotiate with the Ambazonian government in exile. That's the only way out. If they can listen, they must listen. If they cannot listen, somebody will need a hammer to crack open their heads to put this thing into their skulls. Over to you.
Mbeseha. One way or another, they would have to listen at the end of the day. But then we see that even after this 8 years of imprisoning Ambazonians, first leaders, the struggle, well, we wouldn't say first leaders, but then Ambazonian leaders, the struggle for self-determination shows no sign of retreat. And on Sunday morning in Bafmeng, in the Boyo area, fighters of the Ambazonian State Army, Boyo Pythons, reportedly killed 2 Colonial police officers and seized the weapons in a targeted operation. The incident is significant not merely for its military outcome, but for what it represents politically and historically. It comes just one day after the 8th anniversary of the NERA-10 abduction. An unmistakable reminder that incarceration, intimidation, and collective punishment have failed to extinguish resistance. For many Ambazonians, the operation is viewed as part of a broader continuum. When peaceful leaders are jailed indefinitely, when students are dragged from campuses, and when civilians are subjected to daily arbitrary arrests, resistance inevitably shifts form. The imprisonment of political leadership did not end the struggle, it decentralized it. 8 years ago, the regime sought to decapitate the movement by abducting its leaders. But then today, armed groups operating at the local level demonstrate that the cause has outgrown any single group of individuals. The fight has become embedded in communities shaped by lived experiences of repression rather than ideological ones. Now, this reality poses a stark lesson. Military force and mass arrests may suppress visibility, but they do not resolve political grievances. Instead, they deepen alienation, harden resolve, and prolong conflict. The events in Bafmeng show that despite years of crackdowns, the demand for self-determination remains active, adaptive, and also resilient. 8 years on, Ambazonians' leadership remains behind bars. Yet the struggle they articulated continues outside prison walls, carried forward by a population that has refused to surrender its political aspirations. History is increasingly clear that a movement rooted in identity and justice cannot be jailed out of existence. Well, Barris and Mbeseha, you've said it before that they might have cut the branches, but then the root is still growing deep. And one way or another, they would listen. But now, Barris and Mbeseha, there is a question that begs for answer. Given that the imprisonment of political leaders and criminalization of peaceful political activity, because as you said, back then when the NERA-10 was arrested, there was no armed conflict. Now, given the criminalization of peaceful political activity, it has coincided with the persistence and decentralization of armed resistance. How does international law assess responsibility when a state's prolonged repression, French Cameroon's prolonged repression, arguably contributes to the transformation of a political dispute into sustained armed confrontation? And what legal obligation does that impose on the state to pursue political rather than purely military solutions?
Well, I would say this, not in general terms. The regime seems to be completely out of touch with real events in the world. Ours is not the first struggle anywhere in the world. I'm talking about armed struggle. We are doing armed self-defense. I can say this openly. What we call Ambazonian armed defense. We don't even have the arms. The little arms that we got, whatever thing we have and call the arms. Good armory, what we have. We got from them, we seized it from them. I say they must have made this reality. We seized the arms from them. At the beginning, we were using our spears and cutlasses. Remember that symbol with the big rubber gun? That's what we had. Today, we can see that what you have shown on the video there. Those are their arms. Are we going to give them back to them? No. That will go into our armory. It creates our defense forces. We are doing nothing absolutely wrong. If they think that they can divert attention from the real problem, they are wasting their time. It has never happened like that anywhere else in the world. They must admit that reality, that what they thought in 2017, that in November, when Paul Biya declared the war, that they were going to win within 2 weeks. 2 weeks is multiplied by how many times to give you 8, 9 years. That's the truth about it. They will not defeat Ambazonia militarily. That's just a fact. They might delay the process by prolonging the war, but they will not defeat Ambazonia militarily. They will not. And so, whatever thing they are doing, they are living out of the practical world of politics. They are living out of the practical world of conflict resolution. No conflict, no matter how big or small it is, will end on the battlefield. The most reliable way to end the conflict is to talk negotiation. What is negotiation? Getting to the aggrieved people and say, what is the problem? You say, well, I didn't eat, or he took away my wife, he took away my husband. And then the matter will be resolved. If you want to own the wife, you want to own the husband, you pay back the bride price, or whatever it is. And so they are living in a world of their own imagination, self-imagination, self-pride. That will not help them in a way else. Remember, this idea of getting to the conference table and addressing the root causes of the problem without precondition, they don't even come from Ambazonia, we're just fighting. Who made this careful definition of what to do? It was the United States government under Trump in 2019. That was a short definition. The Americans, the American government, they fought wars all over the world. They fought the War of Independence and discovered they had to negotiate it with Great Britain. They have been to Vietnam and fought. They have been to Afghanistan. They have been to Iraq. They have been to all corners of the world and fought wars. And realized that you are not going to win a revolution by war. You are going to negotiate your way out. When the Americans left Afghanistan, they negotiated to take away their people, carry away their arms that they had. That's what happened to them in Iraq. And this is a mighty power with a lot of money, with a lot of personnel, with a lot of technology, and yet they tell you, do this. If you can listen to any advice, you would listen to that. Even the French, they left Tunisia, they left Algeria. They were forced out there to negotiate their way out. And so whatever the people are daydreaming that they will defeat Ambazonians on the war front, no, they will not. As I've said, they will not. It is practically impossible at this stage. By the 9th year that we are in, going to the 10th year, any reasonable person would have realized that the armed adventure is not going to be successful. You don't need to go to the soothsayer in the Bolova to tell you that. If Paul Biya thinks that he can do this, well, one thing I believe strongly is the war is going to survive Paul Biya. At 93, he doesn't have many years to live. If he went to the negotiation table now, maybe he would die on the negotiation table. He would die of old age. That's how human beings go away. Nobody at 93 expects to produce anything better. And the whole ruling clique in Yaoundé there, be it Paul Biya, be it Yaya Jabri, be it the president of the Senate, they're in their 90s. This problem will survive them. If the end of the war depends upon them, they will leave the problem behind. It will not be easy for them, but they must swallow that bitter pill of saying that what they consider to be two cubes of sugar that will melt within hours or within seconds has become 2 tons of steel that will not melt even in the hottest fire. And so for them, until they learn this reality, together with their supporters, France in particular, they will not get themselves out of trouble. They will send this problem to their children. I wish they resurrect Mr. Ahijo to come and see what he did, the consequences of his actions in 1972 and 1961, what has brought this country to. It has brought the country to its own knees. They have no money. It has brought the people to thousands of their own children being killed for a cause that was not necessary to fight for. In 1961, they voted against this so-called union. They simply have walked away because they didn't even want the union. They voted against it. But why are they fighting? Simply because the first union, in that first union, they have been able to get twins and triplets that they will give out to marriage and get a big dowry. They have discovered gold. They have discovered gas. They've discovered oil. They are no longer fighting for the importance of Ambazonia. They are fighting for what they get out of the illegal union. I wish Ahijo came back and the people died with him. Until this fact is understood, until, I said before, one crowd their scores and put this thing into them. Shall they find peace? There will be no Cameroon as we know it without the independence of Ambazonia. So says President Sako. Over to you.
Indeed, those are some strong words that Ambazonians have lived up to, as we can see with everyday strikes against the French Cameroon invading forces. Well, it is at this juncture we'll call it quits with you, Barrister Mbeseha. It's been a pleasure having you yet again on Undaunted. Thank you for joining us yet again today.
Thank you for having me too.
All right, coming will be news from around Africa. we see that in Africa, President Faustin Archange Touadera has been provisionally declared the winner of the Central African Republic's presidential election, securing a third term with more than 76% of the vote, according to the country's electoral authority. His closest challenger, former Prime Minister Anicet George Dologuel, trailed far behind with 15%, while another former Prime Minister, Henry Marie Dondra, garnered just 3%. Running on a platform centered on national reconciliation, Touadera framed his victory as a mandate to continue engaging armed groups in dialogue, arguing that peace is gradually returning because of his outreach. After years of bloodshed, displacement, and instability, many voters were drawn to the promise of continuity. But does stability achieved through negotiation with armed actors guarantee long-term peace, or does it risk entrenching compromise over accountability? Now, the election itself was unprecedented in scale, with citizens voting simultaneously for presidential, legislative, regional, and municipal offices. Roughly 2.4 million voters were registered, and turnout stood at about 52%, while supporters celebrated across Bangui. Opposition figures rejected the result, calling the vote deeply flawed. Two opposition candidates have already lodged formal challenges, alleging widespread fraud and irregularities by the National Elections Authority. Dologuel went further, declaring himself the rightful winner and warning that the official results did not reflect the will of the people. Touadera's office has dismissed these claims and cautioned that inflammatory rhetoric could spark unrest, even as African Union observers reported that the elections were conducted peacefully. Final results are expected later this month after the resolution of appeals. Beyond the ballot box, analysts note that Touadera has steadily consolidated power within state institutions since taking office, raising concerns about democratic checks and balances. The country's fragile security landscape remains a defining issue. Although violence has declined since a 2019 peace deal with 14 armed groups, several factions later withdrew and insecurity persists in parts of the country. Foreign influence continues to shape Central African Republic's trajectory. Russian mercenary group Wagner has long provided security for Touadera, though relations have reportedly cooled amid Moscow's push to replace Wagner with a state-run African corps. Now, Rwanda has already also emerged as a key security partner, while the UN peacekeeping mission MINUSCA faces a gradual drawdown due to funding constraints. As international forces recede, we wonder if domestic institutions can shoulder the burden of security without sliding back into conflict. And with Somalia, we see Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has announced plans to open an embassy in Somaliland, marking a dramatic escalation in ties following Israel's decision to formally recognize the breakaway territory as a sovereign state. Saar's visit to Hargeisa, the first by an Israeli foreign minister, was hailed by Somaliland authorities as a historic milestone, but condemned by Somalia and several international actors as a violation of sovereignty. Speaking alongside Somaliland, President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi, known as Iro Saar, said Israel would not be deterred by criticism and insisted that decisions on recognition and diplomacy are Israel's alone. The two sides pledged to exchange ambassadors and deepen bilateral cooperation, signaling a clear intent to normalize relations despite mounting backlash. Somalia's federal government swiftly denounced the visit, calling it an unacceptable interference in its internal affairs and reiterating that Somaliland remains an integral part of Somali territory. Social media footage appearing to show fighter jets flying over Hargeisa during SARS visit added to the tension, although the origin of the aircraft was not immediately confirmed. Now, was the flyover a show of force, a coincidence, or a calculated message to regional rivals? Well, Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991 amid the collapse of the Somali state. While it has since developed its own government, currency, and security apparatus, no country has formally recognized it until Israel's move last month. That decision has drawn sharp criticism from the African Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and more than 20 predominantly African and Middle Eastern countries. Egypt described the recognition as a dangerous precedent that threatens regional peace, while the United States distanced itself, reaffirming its support for Somalia's territorial integrity, including Somaliland. Now, the controversy is further complicated by reports that Israel previously discussed with Somaliland the possibility of resettling Palestinians from Gaza, a plan later abandoned by Washington. Now, could this recognition reshape diplomatic alignments in the Horn of Africa, or will it only deepen instability in an already volatile region? Well, that we have no answer to at the moment. But then coming up next will be news around the rest of the globe. On the global scene, key allies of Ukraine are set to gather in Paris for a high-stakes summit aimed at aligning security guarantees as diplomatic efforts to end the war with Russia intensify. The meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing brings together representatives from 35 countries, including 27 heads of state, underscoring the urgency surrounding Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. Now, hosted by France and supported by the United Kingdom, the summit seeks to demonstrate unity between Washington, Kyiv, and European partners at a critical juncture. With the United States' brokered proposal gaining traction, leaders are grappling with how to deter future aggression while creating conditions for a sustainable peace. But then what form should security guarantees take, and how far are allies willing to go to enforce them? We see that the United States President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law Jared Kushner are expected to attend, highlighting Washington's central role in shaping the negotiations. The Paris talks are part of a broader series of diplomatic engagements planned for the new year, as pressure mounts on all sides to move beyond the battlefield toward a negotiated settlement. For Ukraine, the outcome could define its post-war future, including its sovereignty and long-term security architecture. For Europe, the stakes are equally high, as the conflict has reshaped defense policies, energy security, and relations with Russia. Can unity among allies translate into concrete guarantees, or will differing national interests once again complicate the path forward? Well, we see that former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has pleaded not guilty to drug trafficking and related charges in a New York court days after the United States forces carried out a dramatic raid on his home in Caracas and transferred him to the United States. Smiling as he entered the courtroom in Manhattan, Maduro insisted on his innocence and described his arrest as a kidnapping. Speaking through an interpreter, the 63-year-old told the judge that he remains Venezuela's president and was unlawfully captured on January 3rd. His wife, Celia Flores, also entered a not guilty plea. The judge ordered both to remain in custody and scheduled the next hearing for March 17. The arrest has sent shockwaves across Latin America, raising profound questions about sovereignty, international law, and the reach of U.S. power. Supporters of Maduro denounced the operation as an illegal abduction, while United States officials argue the charges reflect long-standing allegations of state-linked narcotics trafficking. And we wonder, does the case represent a breakthrough in holding powerful figures accountable, or is this only a dangerous precedent for extraterritorial enforcement? The courtroom drama comes amid deep political divisions over Venezuela's future, with Maduro's legitimacy long contested internationally. Now, as legal proceedings unfold, the case is likely to strain already tense U.S.-Venezuela relations and ignite fresh debate over how far global powers should go in pursuing justice beyond their borders. And over to Iran, its judiciary has warned that no leniency will be shown towards what it describes as rioters, even as officials acknowledge the public's right to peaceful protest. The statement follows more than a week of demonstrations triggered by rising living costs, which have escalated into deadly clashes between protesters and security forces. According to official figures, at least 12 people, including members of the security services, have been killed since protests erupted with a shopkeepers' strike in Tehran on December 28 over the weekend. Demonstrations spread to several cities, including Shiraz and parts of western Iran, with chants openly criticizing the country's clerical leadership, rights group reported. Now, tensions intensified after 6 people were killed in clashes on January 1st, marking the first fatality since the unrest began. Now, while authorities frame the protests as disorderly, many demonstrators say they are driven by economic hardship and political frustration. We wonder, how long can the government contain public anger without addressing the underlying grievances that fuel it? Now, adding an international dimension, the United States President Donald Trump has warned that Washington is locked and loaded should Iranian forces kill peaceful protesters, pledging intervention if violence continues. The warning underscores the fragile balance between domestic unrest and external pressure as Iran navigates a moment of heightened volatility both at home and abroad. Well, with that, we've come to the end of tonight's Undaunted. But before we go, let's take a look at our major headlines. On Undaunted tonight, we saw on the Homefront News, confession rekindles allegations of state-backed violence against Ambazonians in the case of Umbaroros. We saw the Colonial forces escalating arbitrary arrests by targeting university community in Bambili. An Ambazonian State Army Boyo Pythons targeted operation amid the Colonial French Cameroon military's crackdown. 8 years after NERA-10, armed resistance signals an unbroken struggle. And in Africa, Touadera secures third term as Central African Republic faces questions of power, peace, and trust. And on the rest of the globe, Maduro denies drug charges after dramatic U.S. raid sparks global outcry. And with that, we've come to the end of tonight's Undaunted News, bringing into the news untold stories. On behalf of the entire Undaunted crew, we say thank you for tuning in. We'll leave you with ABC Amba TV images, and we say good night and God bless you.